The morning that changed everything. Marcus Daniels woke early every day. It was a ritual, a discipline he had inherited from his father, a former Marine who often reminded him, "Son, the world rewards the early riser." At 17, Marcus didn't need the motivation of reward. He ran because running was freedom, a break from the whispers, the judgmental stares, and the unspoken questions he faced as one of the few black students in the affluent, predominantly white suburb of Maplewood. This morning was like any other. The sun had barely kissed the horizon when Marcus laced his running shoes, slipped on his headphones, and left the house. The track at Maplewood High was his sanctuary. It was where he silenced doubts, outran stereotypes, and felt completely in control. As he sprinted across the lanes, the crisp morning air filled his lungs, and his thoughts focused only on his form, his pace, and the rhythm of his feet hitting the pavement. He was preparing for the upcoming state championships, a stepping stone to the scholarships he dreamed of earning. Marcus had natural talent, but it was his unyielding dedication that made him the pride of the Maplewood High track team. His coach often joked that Marcus trained harder than the entire team combined, and it wasn't far from the truth. As the minutes turned into hours, Marcus slowed to a jog, his shirt damp with sweat, his breathing labored but steady. He approached the bleachers where he'd left his gym bag and water bottle. Taking a long swig, he let the cool water soothe the burn in his throat. Then he saw her. A woman stood near the entrance to the track, arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on him. Her perfectly styled blonde hair gleamed under the morning sun, and her pressed jacket suggested she was on her way to somewhere important. Patricia Whitmore, or Mrs. Whitmore, to most of the neighborhood, was a name everyone knew. Self-proclaimed as the unofficial guardian of Maplewood's order and propriety, Patricia was infamous for her hawkish vigilance. She'd once called the police on a group of kids playing basketball after dark because she thought they looked suspicious. Marcus's chest tightened. He had done nothing wrong, yet he could feel the weight of her judgment bearing down on him. She started toward him, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Excuse me," she called, her voice sharp. "What do you think you're doing here?" Marcus took a deep breath. He had learned how to handle situations like this, thanks to countless conversations with his parents. Stay calm. Be respectful. Explain yourself clearly. His mother's words echoed in his mind as he offered a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm training for the state championships. I'm on the school track team." "At this hour?" she demanded, narrowing her eyes. "This is school property. You can't just trespass whenever you feel like it." Marcus clenched his jaw, fighting the frustration bubbling inside him. "I have permission from my coach. He knows I train here early in the mornings." Her eyes flicked to his gym bag, then back to him. "What's in the bag?" she asked, suspicion dripping from her tone. Marcus blinked, momentarily stunned. "It's just my water and gear," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's all." "I don't believe you," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He froze, his mind racing. He had heard too many stories of situations like this. Black men confronted by the police over misunderstandings, or worse, assumptions. His parents had warned him, prepared him, but nothing could dull the sharp edge of fear slicing through him now. "Ma'am, there's no need for that," Marcus said, his voice tinged with urgency. "If you want, I can call Coach Simmons or Mr. Porter, the groundskeeper. They'll tell you I have permission to be here." But Patricia was already speaking into her phone. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual at Maplewood High. He's acting aggressively, and I'm concerned for my safety." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Aggressively. He hadn't raised his voice or even taken a step toward her. He glanced around, desperate for help, but the track was deserted save for the distant figure of Mr. Porter, the elderly groundskeeper, tending to the school garden. "Please," Marcus said, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. "I'm just here to train. That's it." Patricia hung up the phone and crossed her arms, a look of triumph on her face. We'll see what the police have to say about that. The minutes stretched into an eternity as Marcus stood rooted in place, his heart pounding in his chest. He thought about running, not from the police, but from the unbearable weight of this moment. But he knew better. Running would only confirm her worst assumptions. So he stayed, his mind spinning with every worst-case scenario. When the police arrived, their flashing lights slicing through the morning calm, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. 4 officers stepped out of their vehicles, their faces unreadable as they approached him. "Let's see some ID," one of them said, his voice firm but not hostile. "It's in my bag," Marcus replied, forcing himself to speak slowly. "May I reach for it?" The officer nodded, but the tension in the air was palpable. Marcus moved carefully, unzipping his bag and pulling out his wallet. His hand shook as he handed over his school ID, the small card suddenly feeling like his lifeline. One of the officers stepped away to verify his information, while the others stayed, their gazes fixed on him. Marcus kept his hands visible, his heart hammering so loudly he thought they might hear it. From the corner of his eye, he saw Mr. Porter approaching. The old man, usually slow and deliberate in his movements, was practically jogging toward them. He waved a hand as he called out, "Officers, officers, hold on now. Marcus is one of our best students. He's here every morning. There's no trouble here." The officers turned toward Mr. Porter, their postures relaxing slightly as he explained the situation. The tension began to dissipate, but Marcus could still feel Patricia's eyes on him, her disapproval radiating like heat. The officer who had checked his ID returned, handing it back with a curt nod. "It checks out," he said. "You're free to go." But before Marcus could take a breath of relief, Patricia spoke up. "Free to go? What about trespassing? What about intimidating me?" The lead officer sighed, clearly losing patience. "Ma'am, he's a student here, and he has permission to use the track. There's no crime being committed." Patricia's face turned red, but she said nothing more. The officers turned to leave, and Mr. Porter placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You're all right, son," he said softly. "Keep your head up." But as Marcus gathered his things and prepared to leave, he knew that this moment was far from over. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of something deeper, something that couldn't be ignored. And as he walked away from the track, he realized this was only the beginning. The ripple effect. The day after the incident at the track, Marcus awoke with a heavy weight on his chest. He had barely slept, his mind replaying every moment of the confrontation. The flashing lights of the police cars, the sharp tone of Patricia Whitmore's voice, the quiet yet heavy judgment in the eyes of the officers, it all looped in his head like a song he couldn't turn off. Marcus's parents noticed his subdued demeanor over breakfast. His father, Gerald, a man who exuded calm authority, gave him a curious glance. "You seem quiet this morning, Marcus. How was your run yesterday?" Marcus hesitated, his fork pausing midair. Should he tell them? Should he burden them with the truth of what had happened? But the memory of his coach and Mr. Porter stepping up for him gave him courage. He put his fork down and took a deep breath. "Something happened at the track yesterday," Marcus began. "Mrs. Whitmore called the police on me while I was training." The room fell silent. His mother, Denise, who had been checking emails on her phone, looked up sharply. "What?" she said, her voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and anger. "Why?" Marcus explained the events as calmly as he could, detailing Patricia's accusations and the police confrontation. He didn't leave anything out, not even the embarrassment of having to defend his right to simply exist in a space he belonged to. By the time he finished, Gerald's hands were clenched into fists, and Denise's eyes shone with unshed tears. She reached across the table and placed a hand over Marcus. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," she said softly. "It's not right." "It's not just not right," Gerald said, his voice steady but simmering with anger. "It's unacceptable. That woman had no business calling the police on you. You did nothing wrong. She assumed I was up to something just because I'm black, Marcus said, his frustration spilling out. No matter how much I do to prove myself, it's like people only see what they want to see. Gerald leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. This isn't just about you, son. This is about the world we live in. And as unfair as it is, it's something we have to face head-on. Denise nodded, her expression resolute. We need to address this, not just for you, Marcus, but for every kid who might face the same thing. The spark of change. That morning, Denise and Gerald decided to act. Denise contacted the school principal, Mr. Ellis, requesting an immediate meeting to discuss the incident. As a lawyer, Denise was no stranger to advocating for justice, and she intended to use every tool at her disposal to ensure this wouldn't happen again. The ripple effect. The day after the incident at the track, Marcus awoke with a heavy weight on his chest. He had barely slept, his mind replaying every moment of the confrontation. The flashing lights of the police cars, the sharp tone of Patricia Whitmore's voice, the quiet yet heavy judgment in the eyes of the officers. It all looped in his head like a song he couldn't turn off. Marcus's parents noticed his subdued demeanor over breakfast. His father, Gerald, a man who exuded calm authority, gave him a curious glance. You seem quiet this morning, Marcus. How was your run yesterday? Marcus hesitated, his fork pausing midair. Should he tell them? Should he burden them with the truth of what had happened? But the memory of his coach and Mr. Porter stepping up for him gave him courage. He put his fork down and took a deep breath. Something happened at the track yesterday, Marcus began. Mrs. Whitmore called the police on me while I was training. The room fell silent. His mother, Denise, who had been checking emails on her phone, looked up sharply. What? She said, her voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and anger. Why? Marcus explained the events as calmly as he could, detailing Patricia's accusations and the police confrontation. He didn't leave anything out, not even the embarrassment of having to defend his right to simply exist in a space he belonged to. By the time he finished, Gerald's hands were clenched into fists, and Denise's eyes shone with unshed tears. She reached across the table and placed a hand over Marcus's. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, she said softly. It's not right. It's not just not right, Gerald said, his voice steady but simmering with anger. It's unacceptable. That woman had no business calling the police on you. You did nothing wrong. She assumed I was up to something just because I'm black, Marcus said, his frustration spilling out. No matter how much I do to prove myself, it's like people only see what they want to see. Gerald leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. This isn't just about you, son. This is about the world we live in. And as unfair as it is, it's something we have to face head-on. Denise nodded, her expression resolute. We need to address this, not just for you, Marcus, but for every kid who might face the same thing. The spark of change. That morning, Denise and Gerald decided to act. Denise contacted the school principal, Mr. Ellis, requesting an immediate meeting to discuss the incident. As a lawyer, Denise was no stranger to advocating for justice, and she intended to use every tool at her disposal to ensure this wouldn't happen again. Marcus was reluctant to go, fearing that his parents' involvement might make things worse. But Denise insisted. This isn't just about standing up for yourself, Marcus. It's about showing people like Mrs. Whitmore that their actions have consequences. When they arrived at the school, they were met by Mr. Ellis, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a perpetually worried expression. He led them into his office, where Coach Simmons and Mr. Porter were already waiting. Marcus felt a small surge of relief at the sight of his allies. After pleasantries were exchanged, Denise wasted no time getting to the point. Mr. Ellis, we're here because my son was racially profiled yesterday on school grounds. Despite having permission to train early, he was treated like a trespasser and a criminal. Mr. Ellis shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Daniels, I'm very sorry to hear about this. I was informed of the incident, but I hadn't realized the full scope. It's not just about the incident, Gerald interjected. It's about the culture that allows someone like Patricia Whitmore to feel justified in calling the police on a teenager who's done nothing wrong. Coach Simmons nodded, his expression grim. Marcus is one of the most dedicated athletes I've ever coached. What happened yesterday was unacceptable. He deserves better. I saw the whole thing, Mr. Porter added, his voice shaking with quiet anger. That boy is out there every morning, working harder than anyone else. And for what? To be treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. Mr. Ellis held up a hand to calm the rising tension. I agree with all of you. What happened to Marcus was wrong. But the question is, what can we do about it? Denise leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. We can start by addressing the systemic issues in this community. Maplewood likes to pretend it's perfect, but incidents like this show the cracks in the facade. We need education, awareness, and accountability. Coach Simmons raised a hand. And the school needs to step up. We can't control what happens outside these walls, but we can create an environment where every student feels safe and valued. Mr. Ellis nodded thoughtfully. We can start by holding a community meeting. We'll invite parents, staff, and students to discuss these issues openly. But we'll also need to ensure Marcus feels supported in the meantime. Marcus spoke up for the first time. I just want to be able to train without being harassed. That's all I'm asking for. And you will, Mr. Ellis promised. I'll personally speak with Mrs. Whitmore and make it clear that her behavior was unacceptable. Denise's eyes narrowed. That's a start, but it's not enough. She needs to face consequences. If nothing else, she should be required to apologize to Marcus publicly. The principal hesitated, but eventually nodded. I'll see to it. The community meeting. Word of the incident spread quickly through Maplewood, fueled by social media posts and whispers at PTA meetings. The news ignited a flurry of reactions, some supportive, others defensive. Patricia Whitmore, ever defiant, refused to admit she had done anything wrong. I was just trying to keep the community safe, she told anyone who would listen. But the community meeting, scheduled for the following week, promised to bring everything to a head. When the day arrived, the school auditorium was packed. Students, parents, teachers, and local residents filled the rows, their faces a mixture of curiosity, concern, and tension. Marcus sat near the front with his parents, Coach Simmons, and Mr. Porter. Patricia sat several rows back, her posture stiff and her expression unreadable. Mr. Ellis began the meeting with a somber tone. We're here today to discuss an incident that has brought to light deeper issues in our community, issues of bias, prejudice, and the way we perceive one another. He invited Marcus to share his experience. Though nervous, Marcus stood and recounted the events of that morning. His voice was steady, but the raw emotion behind his words filled the room. As he spoke, he saw some faces soften with empathy, while others, like Patricia's, remained impassive. When he finished, the room erupted into murmurs. Mr. Ellis raised a hand for silence. Thank you, Marcus. Now, I'd like to open the floor for discussion. What followed was a heated debate. Some parents expressed outrage at Patricia's actions, calling them unacceptable and a poor reflection of the community. Others defended her, claiming she had acted out of concern, and that the real issue was misunderstanding. Through it all, Marcus sat silently, his fists clenched. He had hoped this meeting would bring clarity, but instead, it felt like the same battle he faced every day, proving his worth, justifying his existence. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was Coach Simmons. This isn't just about Marcus, he said, his voice firm. It's about every kid who's ever been judged unfairly. We can either keep making excuses, or we can confront our biases and do better. The room fell silent. For the first time that evening, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. As the meeting ended, Mr. Ellis promised to implement new policies, including cultural sensitivity training for staff and community workshops. It was a small step, but it was a start. As Marcus left the auditorium that night, he realized something important. The fight wasn't over. But he wasn't alone in it anymore. And for the first time since that fateful morning, he felt a sense of purpose burning within him, a determination to keep running, not just on the track, but toward a better future. A community divided. The aftermath of the community meeting rippled through Maplewood like a stone thrown into still water. The incident at the track had ignited a firestorm of opinions, dividing the quiet suburban neighborhood. Some residents rallied behind Marcus, praising his courage and calling for change. Others doubled down on their defenses, insisting that Patricia Whitmore had only been protecting the community. Local forums and social media pages buzzed with heated debates, with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #MaplewoodPride trending simultaneously. Marcus found himself at the center of attention, a position he had never sought and didn't particularly want. At school, his classmates treated him differently. Some avoided him altogether, while others approached with awkward sympathy. "Hey, Marcus," one of his teammates, Brian, said during practice. "I just wanted to say what happened was messed up, man. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Marcus nodded, appreciating the gesture, but the pity in Brian's eyes made his stomach churn. He didn't want apologies or pity. He wanted to be left alone to focus on his training. Yet, no matter where he went, the whispers followed. "Did you hear what happened to Marcus? Mrs. Whitmore called the cops on him for running. Do you think he's okay?" The weight of it all was exhausting. Even the track, his sanctuary, felt tainted now. Every time he stepped onto the lanes, he couldn't shake the memory of the police officers approaching him, their hands hovering near their holsters. The interview. A week after the meeting, Marcus received an unexpected email from a local journalist, Carla Reynolds. She worked for the Maplewood Gazette, a small but widely read publication. Carla wanted to interview Marcus for a story about the incident and its impact on the community. At first, Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted to relive the experience, let alone discuss it with someone he didn't know. But after talking it over with his parents and Coach Simmons, he decided to go through with it. "Your story deserves to be heard," his mother said. "This is bigger than you, Marcus." The interview took place at the school library, with Carla setting up her recording equipment at one of the study tables. She was a young, sharp-eyed woman who exuded confidence and professionalism. After some small talk to put Marcus at ease, she got straight to the point. "Marcus, can you walk me through what happened that morning at the track?" Carla asked, her voice gentle but firm. Marcus recounted the story once more, his words slow and measured. He described how Patricia had approached him, accused him of trespassing, and called the police despite his explanations. He spoke about the fear he felt as the officers arrived, the humiliation of having to prove his innocence, and the relief when Mr. Porter and Coach Simmons intervened. Carla listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "How did that experience make you feel?" she asked. Marcus hesitated, searching for the right words. "It was frustrating," he said finally. "No matter how hard I work or how much I accomplish, there's always someone ready to tear me down because of what I look like. It's like they see my skin before they see me." Carla nodded. "And how you feel about the community's response since then?" "That's the hardest part," Marcus admitted. "Some people have been really supportive, but others act like I'm the problem. Like I should have just stayed home and avoided the track altogether. It's like they don't want to admit there's a problem in the first place." Carla leaned forward, her expression earnest. "If you could say one thing to those people, what would it be?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I'd tell them to really think about what kind of community they want Maplewood to be. Do they want it to be a place where everyone feels safe and welcome? Or do they want it to be a place where people like me are constantly questioned and judged? Because it can't be both." Patricia Whitmore's defense. As Carla's article was being finalized, Patricia Whitmore decided to speak out as well. She contacted a rival publication, the Maplewood Weekly, and gave her side of the story. In the interview, Patricia portrayed herself as a concerned citizen who had acted out of an abundance of caution. "I've lived in Maplewood for over 30 years," she said. "I've always cared deeply about the safety of this community. When I saw someone on the track that morning, I didn't know who he was or why he was there. I had no choice but to call the authorities. I wasn't trying to target anyone. I was just doing my duty." Her comments sparked even more controversy. Supporters of Marcus pointed out the flaws in her argument, highlighting the racial undertones of her actions. Others defended her, claiming that she was being unfairly vilified. The divide deepened. The ripple reaches farther. Meanwhile, Carla's article, titled "Running Against the Current: A Teen's Fight for Equality in Maplewood," went viral within hours of its publication. It was shared across social media platforms and even caught the attention of regional news outlets. People from neighboring towns began weighing in, some applauding Marcus for his resilience, others criticizing Maplewood's deeply ingrained biases. One evening, as Marcus scrolled through his phone, he noticed an influx of messages. Strangers from all over the state were reaching out, some sharing their own experiences with racism, others simply offering words of encouragement. "Stay strong, Marcus. You're inspiring a lot of people. I've been where you are. Man, keep running, no matter what. Don't let them break you. You've got this." The messages were overwhelming but uplifting. For the first time since the incident, Marcus felt like he wasn't alone. But not all the attention was positive. Some comments were cruel, accusing Marcus of playing the race card or blowing things out of proportion. Those stung the most. Marcus wanted to ignore them, but they lingered in his mind, sowing seeds of doubt. The unexpected ally. A few days later, Marcus was approached by an unexpected ally, Miss Patel, his English teacher. She was one of the few teachers at Maplewood High who consistently included diverse perspectives in her curriculum. After class, she asked Marcus to stay behind. "I saw the article," she said, her voice kind but serious. "And I just want you to know, I'm proud of you." "Thanks," Marcus said, shifting uncomfortably. He wasn't used to this kind of attention from teachers. Ms. Patel smiled. "I know this is a lot to carry, but you're handling it with so much grace. If you ever need someone to talk to, my door is always open." Marcus nodded, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Ms. Patel. That means a lot." She paused, then added, "By the way, I'm organizing a discussion panel for Black History Month next week. I think it would be powerful if you spoke about your experience. No pressure, of course, but think about it." The idea terrified Marcus. The thought of standing in front of a crowd and sharing his story was daunting. But as he walked home that day, he found himself considering it. Maybe this was his chance to turn something negative into something meaningful. A new resolve. That evening, Marcus sat down with his parents to discuss the panel. To his surprise, they were both immediately supportive. "This is your opportunity to make an impact," Gerald said, "to show people what needs to change." Denise nodded, "And to remind them that you're not just a victim. You're a young man with dreams and potential." Their words resonated with Marcus. He realized that his story wasn't just his own anymore. It was a part of something bigger, a movement to make Maplewood, and communities like it, better places for everyone. As he prepared for the panel, Marcus felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. He wasn't just running for championships anymore. He was running for something much greater, change. And he wasn't going to stop. Standing in the spotlight, the morning of the Black History Month panel, Marcus Daniels sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the notepad in his lap. The paper was filled with half-formed sentences and scratched-out phrases. He had spent the past week preparing for this moment. Yet now, as the clock ticked closer to the event, doubt gnawed at his confidence. "Do I really have anything to say?" he muttered under his breath. The weight of the past weeks, Patricia Whitmore's accusations, the police encounter, the community's division, felt suffocating. He had lived through it, but now he had to relive it in front of an audience. His mother, Denise, appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of tea. "You're overthinking again," she said with a knowing smile. Marcus sighed. "What if I mess up? What if no one listens?" Denise walked in and sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're not just speaking for yourself, Marcus. You're speaking for everyone who's ever been judged unfairly. You don't need to have the perfect words. Just tell your truth." Her words settled him. Marcus nodded, closed his notebook, and got dressed. He wasn't just running anymore. He was stepping into the light. The auditorium. By noon, the school auditorium was packed. Rows of students, teachers, and community members filled the seats, the air buzzing with anticipation. The stage was set with a simple podium and a banner overhead that read, "Black History Month, honoring the past, building the future." Marcus stood backstage with Ms. Patel and a few other panelists, including a local activist and a retired judge. He felt small in comparison to their experience and authority, but Ms. Patel's reassuring smile reminded him why he was here. When the moderator introduced Marcus, the room fell silent. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded him, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw familiar faces in the crowd. His parents, Coach Simmons, Mr. Porter, and even some of his teammates. Their presence steadied him. Marcus gripped the edges of the podium, his palms slick with sweat. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "My name is Marcus Daniels, and I'm a student here at Maplewood High." The room remained quiet, all eyes on him. He swallowed hard and continued. "A few weeks ago, I was training on the school track, preparing for the state championships. I've been doing this for months with my coach's permission. But that morning, someone called the police on me. They thought I didn't belong there." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I thought a lot about that moment, about how quickly someone assumed I was a threat, even though I was just running. And it made me realize something. It's not just about me. It's about the way people see each other, the way they judge each other without really knowing who they are." The audience was rapt, hanging on his every word. Marcus took another deep breath, feeling his confidence grow. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a bigger problem. One that's not just about Maplewood, but about the world we live in. And if we want things to change, we have to start here, in our own community." He scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on Patricia Whitmore. She sat stiffly near the back, her face unreadable. Marcus didn't look away. "We need to challenge the assumptions we make about people. We need to ask ourselves why we're so quick to judge. Because if we don't, nothing will ever get better." The applause started slowly, then grew into a standing ovation. Marcus stepped back from the podium, his heart pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the realization that he had been heard. The aftermath. After the panel, Marcus was approached by a wave of students and teachers, many of them eager to share their thoughts. "That was amazing, Marcus," said Brian, his teammate. "I didn't realize how much you've been dealing with. I'm sorry I never said anything before." "It's okay," Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure if it really was, but Brian's acknowledgement felt like a start. Miss Patel came over, beaming with pride. "You were incredible," she said. "I knew you had it in you." Even Principal Ellis, who had remained relatively quiet during the controversy, stopped by to shake Marcus's hand. "You've inspired a lot of people today," he said, "including me." As the crowd thinned, Marcus spotted Patricia lingering near the auditorium doors. For a moment, he thought she might approach him, but instead, she turned and walked away. A catalyst for change. The impact of Marcus's speech spread far beyond the school. Clips of his talk circulated online, gaining traction on social media. News outlets picked up the story, framing Marcus as a symbol of resilience and hope in the face of prejudice. The school began implementing some of the changes discussed during the community meeting. Cultural sensitivity workshops were scheduled for teachers and students, and a diversity and inclusion committee was formed to address systemic issues within the school. Marcus was invited to join, a role he accepted with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Beyond the school, the broader community of Maplewood began to shift. Churches, local businesses, and neighborhood associations started holding forums and events to discuss race and inclusion. Conversations that had once been whispered behind closed doors were now happening out in the open. But not everyone was ready for change. A vocal minority, including Patricia, resisted the efforts, claiming they were unnecessary and divisive. The tension in the community remained, but Marcus knew that change was never easy. Progress required discomfort, and he was willing to endure it if it meant a better future. Rediscovering the track. A week after the panel, Marcus returned to the track for the first time since the incident. The early morning air was crisp, and the lane stretched out before him, beckoning him back to his routine. As he started his warm-up laps, he felt the familiar rhythm return. Each step, each breath, was a reminder of why he ran, not just for championships, but for the freedom it gave him. The track was his sanctuary again, not because the world had changed, but because he had. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden glow over the field, Marcus pushed himself harder, faster. He wasn't just running toward the finish line anymore. He was running toward a future he was determined to shape, one where every step he took, every mile he ran, was a testament to his resilience. This time, the track wasn't just a place to train. It was a stage, a platform, and a symbol of how far he had come, and how much farther he was willing to go. Turning the tides. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Marcus Daniels. His life, once confined to the predictable rhythms of school, track practice, and quiet weekends with his family, had become something entirely different. His story had sparked a fire in Maplewood, and its flames reached far beyond the town's borders. The video of his Black History Month speech continued to circulate online. Local journalists wrote follow-ups, highlighting the systemic changes taking root in Maplewood. Even state and regional media began to cover the town's reckoning with bias and prejudice. Marcus's face was suddenly recognizable, his name attached to discussions about change, fairness, and resilience. But with the attention came challenges. For every person who praised Marcus for his courage, there was another who dismissed his experience or accused him of stirring up trouble. Anonymous social media accounts left hateful comments on his posts. Marcus tried to ignore them, but some of the words stuck. Maybe if you weren't so sensitive, none of this would have been a problem. Stop playing the victim card. Everyone's got problems. Why are we giving this kid a platform? This whole thing is blown out of proportion. His parents shielded him from the worst of it, encouraging him to focus on the positive impact he was making. But the negativity lingered like a shadow, making Marcus question whether he was truly making a difference. A new challenge. One evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table reviewing a stack of scholarship applications, his coach, Mr. Simmons, called. "Marcus," Coach Simmons began, his voice laced with excitement, "I got some news that might lift your spirits." "What's up, Coach?" Marcus asked, setting his pen down. "I've been talking to a few college scouts about you, and I've got a surprise. The University of St. Charles is sending someone to watch you compete at next week's state championships. If you impress them, we're looking at a potential full-ride scholarship." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The University of St. Charles was a prestigious school with one of the best track programs in the country. "Are you serious?" he asked, barely able to contain his excitement. "Dead serious," Coach Simmons replied. "You've earned this, Marcus. Now let's make sure you're ready." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The state championships had always been his goal, but now they carried even greater weight. A strong performance could open doors he had only dreamed of. The pressure builds. As the championships approached, Marcus threw himself into training. Early mornings and late afternoons became a blur of sprints, drills, and meticulous preparation. Coach Simmons was relentless, pushing Marcus harder than ever before. "You're not just running for yourself anymore," Coach said during one grueling practice. "You're running for every kid who's ever been underestimated. Remember that." The weight of those words settled on Marcus's shoulders. He knew Coach meant well, but it was hard not to feel overwhelmed. Every step on the track felt heavier, every breath harder to catch. The whispers at school didn't help. Some students cheered him on, but others muttered about the attention he was receiving. "Must be nice to have the whole town rallying around you," one classmate sneered. "Guess some people get all the breaks." Marcus bit his tongue, refusing to rise to the bait. He reminded himself that he had earned every opportunity through years of hard work. But the negativity was like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. Unexpected allies. One afternoon, as Marcus was leaving the track, he was approached by a group of younger students. They looked nervous, shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. "Hey, Marcus," one of them said hesitantly. "We just wanted to say, we think what you're doing is really cool." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Thanks," he said, surprised by their sudden interest. "We've been watching you," another student added. "Not just on the track, but like how you've handled everything with Mrs. Whitmore and the police. It's inspiring." Marcus didn't know how to respond. He had never thought of himself as a role model, but seeing the admiration in their eyes made him realize how much his actions mattered. "Thanks, guys," he said, his voice softening. "That means a lot. Just remember, if you ever find yourself in a tough spot, don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You've got as much right to be here as anyone else." The students nodded, their expressions serious. As they walked away, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just running for himself anymore. He was running for them too. The day of the championships, the morning of the state championships, dawned crisp and clear. Marcus arrived at the stadium early, his nerves jangling like live wires. The stands were already filling with spectators, their cheers echoing through the air. As Marcus warmed up, he caught sight of the University of St. Charles scout sitting with Coach Simmons. The scout was a middle-aged man with a clipboard and an intense expression, his eyes fixed on the track. "Focus, Marcus," he muttered to himself, "one race at a time." When the announcer called his name for the 400-meter dash, Marcus stepped onto the track, his heart pounding. The other runners lined up beside him, each one exuding confidence and determination. "On your marks. Get set." The starting gun cracked like thunder, and Marcus surged forward. The world blurred around him as he poured every ounce of strength into his stride. The wind whipped against his face, the rhythmic pounding of his feet matching the beat of his heart. As he rounded the final curve, he saw the finish line ahead. The crowd's roar swelled, but Marcus tuned it out, focusing only on the lane ahead. With one final burst of speed, he crossed the line, his chest heaving as he collapsed onto the track. Marcus smiled, but his mind was already racing ahead. The scholarship was a dream come true, but it wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. As the sun set over the stadium, Marcus stood on the track, reflecting on how far he had come. The path hadn't been easy, and he knew there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them. With every step, he was running not just for himself, but for something much bigger, a future where everyone had the chance to cross their own finish line. And Marcus Daniels was determined to lead the way. Beyond the finish line. The weeks following Marcus Daniels' victory at the state championships were a blur of excitement and opportunity. His first-place finish and subsequent scholarship offer from the University of St. Charles had solidified his place as a rising star. But more than that, it had made him a symbol of resilience in Maplewood. Despite the accolades, Marcus remained grounded. His parents, Denise and Gerald, reminded him daily of the importance of humility and perseverance. "This is just one chapter," His mother said one evening as they sat in the living room. "You've started something bigger than yourself, Marcus. Don't lose sight of that." Her words stayed with him, particularly as he prepared for a new challenge. His speech at Maplewood's annual Community Unity Festival. The festival, once a simple gathering of food trucks and local musicians, had taken on new significance in light of recent events. The organizers, inspired by Marcus's story, had decided to dedicate this year's event to fostering dialogue and understanding across the community. They invited Marcus to be the keynote speaker, a role he initially hesitated to accept. "It's just a speech," Coach Simmons had told him, "but it could be the one that changes someone's perspective." With that in mind, Marcus spent nights crafting his words, determined to make them count. The festival. The day of the festival arrived, bringing with it perfect weather and a palpable energy in the air. Families strolled through the park, kids laughed as they chased each other, and vendors lined the pathways, offering everything from artisanal jewelry to homemade pies. At the center of it all stood a stage adorned with banners that read "Maplewood United, building bridges together." Marcus stood behind the stage, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, his speech folded neatly in his hand. "You ready, son?" Gerald asked, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. Marcus nodded, though his nerves were evident. "I think so." As the MC introduced him, Marcus stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. He scanned the crowd and spotted familiar faces: his parents, Coach Simmons, Miss Patel, Mr. Porter, and even some of his younger peers. Near the back, Patricia Whitmore stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Marcus took a deep breath and began. The speech. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus started, his voice steady despite the fluttering in his chest. "Thank you for having me here today. I want to talk about something that's been on my mind since that morning on the track." The crowd quieted, leaning in. "When I think about what happened, it's easy to focus on the fear and frustration I felt in that moment. But what stands out even more is what happened after. People stood up for me. They spoke out against the assumptions and biases that led to that moment. And that showed me something important. Change is possible." He paused, letting his words settle. "But change isn't easy," he continued. "It means facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our community. It means asking hard questions, like, why did I assume what I assumed? Or, what can I do to make things better? It means looking at each other and seeing not just our differences, but our shared humanity." The audience remained silent, their attention unwavering. "This isn't just about me," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "It's about creating a Maplewood where no one feels out of place, where everyone belongs. That starts with listening to each other, learning from each other, and supporting each other." His gaze shifted to Patricia, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can choose how we move forward. And I believe we can move forward together." The applause was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus stepped back, his heart pounding, as the crowd rose to their feet. For the first time, he felt not just heard, but understood. Bridges built. The festival marked a turning point for Maplewood. In the days and weeks that followed, new initiatives sprouted across the community. Schools implemented mentorship programs pairing older students with younger ones, fostering bonds across racial and socioeconomic lines. Local businesses hosted town halls to discuss diversity in hiring practices. Even the police department began outreach efforts to rebuild trust with the community. Patricia Whitmore, once defiant in her actions, remained largely silent. But one afternoon, as Marcus was walking home from school, he saw her standing at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn. She hesitated before calling out, "Marcus." He stopped, unsure what to expect. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore." She stepped closer, her demeanor unusually subdued. "I just wanted to say, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the festival. I may not have understood it all, but I want to try. And I'm sorry for how I treated you." The words took Marcus by surprise. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. That means a lot." As he walked away, he felt a small but significant shift within himself. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was necessary for healing. A new beginning. As the school year came to a close, Marcus prepared for the next chapter of his life. The scholarship to the University of St. Charles had opened doors he once thought were out of reach. But before he left, he wanted to leave something behind. With the help of Coach Simmons and Ms. Patel, Marcus launched the Run Forward Foundation, a program designed to provide resources and mentorship for young athletes from underrepresented backgrounds. The foundation's motto, "Run Forward, Together," became a rallying cry for the community. On the day of the foundation's launch, Marcus stood once more on the Maplewood High Track. This time, he wasn't alone. Dozens of students, parents, and teachers joined him, their presence a testament to the progress they had made together. As Marcus took his first strides down the track, he felt the wind at his back and the weight of his journey lifting. He wasn't just running for himself anymore. He was running for everyone who believed in a brighter, fairer future. And this was only the beginning.